Maghrebin community to look at ways. I had to understand the problem well. I knew it from having read about it, but they were really able to describe to me the issue. And the other thing we did is we created a program that literally targets people who are underrepresented in the workforce, visible minorities, and includes women. And we included la communauté maghrébine because we saw in the numbers that there was a higher incidence of unemployment. And it's called, the program is called Prime. It's where we give part the salaries paid for by the government, so the employer doesn't have to an incentive to hire somebody because the salary is paid. And we had an 80% retention rate with this program. It's a very good program. We don't hear about it anymore. It's continuing, but I know they've cut into the program. But these are the concrete measures that people need and people want. And everybody, I think people are heartbroken when they see this talent is wasted. Frankly, heartbroken. We've attracted them here. We need to integrate them. So the other thing we did, obviously, there's a number of other measures, but one of the other things we did is we tabled Bill 94. The heat never stops on this file, right? And it's always another case, and we saw it this week. So whenever these cases, they're very, there's a lot of media attention to them. So we brought forward Bill 94, and we had hearings. And if you want to see how it should be done when you bring this kind of bill forward, is first of all, we had legal advice. And the legal advice I had from the Ministry of Justice was that our bill passed the constitutional test. It's a bill about reasonable accommodations, and this government has brought a lot of the ideas from our Bill 94, integrated them into the better parts of Bill 60. But the discourse that they had they blocked the bill, essentially. They blocked the bill because they wanted a pure form of secularism, a kind of model that comes from France that doesn't have any roots, either historical or juridical roots here in Quebec or in Canada. And it was Louise Baudouin that was the person that I had in front of me, and Carole Poirier. But what struck me was when all of these, and many of them are lawyers with the Parti Québécois, when they came to essentially do time, really, because we did 30 hours on the first paragraph of Article 1, was the cas par cas. They have a problem with this case-by-case treatment, and they keep saying, c'est toujours du cas par cas, les Québécois ont marre. That's the expression that keeps coming back. Les Québécois ont marre, and you'll hear the minister say that too, that people are fed up with accommodations. So, you have to try to bring rationality, and you talk about jurisprudence, and you talk about the law. And I will get to the law later, because if there's anything to give you hope, it's the law. And it's the beauty of studying law, because at the end of the day, there's courts that have charters of rights. It's the courts that are going to tell governments when they've outrepassé leur pouvoir. So this notion was fed to a large extent by it started off with Mario Toulon in 2007, and the PQ picked up where the LADQ left off. Essentially, all around identity, and the word identity comes up a lot. Identity politics, people talk about identity. So trying to bring a bill on this issue in a very rational way wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. And it got blocked, and so we never were able to pass Bill 94. People said, well, why didn't you ram it through, or do a baillon? A baillon is where there's closure on a bill. Well, we said no. We're dealing with the Charter of Rights. You can't do that. When the Charter of Rights is in question, you have to have consensus. And one of the comments I will be making also is that this government should be looking for consensus. All the parties in the National Assembly, the opposition parties, Québec Solidaire, the CAC, and ourselves have all had our hand, reaching out our hand, la main tendue, saying, let's find a consensus, because it's just too disruptive. It's sort of the best word, or the safe word I could use, too disruptive for Quebec society to be living this debate. And we have to find a consensus. We're not going to get out of this unless we have a consensus. We're dealing with charter rights and minority rights. And when all parliamentary democracies, and it's well known, their number one obligation is to protect minorities. And that's why we have charters of rights. And that's why our Charter of Rights was adopted unanimously. And when you touch the Charter of Rights, the amendments have to be brought forward unanimously. I didn't mention one of the amendments because the comment that was made about equality rights. There's a lot of discussion about guaranteeing equality between men and women, and they kept coming back with this when we were doing Bill 94. And we reminded them that in 2008 we brought an amendment to the Charter of Rights, which was adopted unanimously, to protect even more, promote gender equality was already in the Charter of Rights, the Quebec Charter of Rights, but we enhanced it, and that was under our government. But they just kept raising it, and they continued to raise it, but you could see in their bill, they're essentially repeating that what we had in Bill 94, which essentially said that no accommodation can be granted if it breaches gender equality. Now that's already in the jurisprudence, but it was a way of making sure that the one who has to make a decision on whether to grant or not grant an accommodation understands that if there's any concern about a woman's rights being threatened in any way, then it can't be, there can be no accommodation. And this is already a rule that exists in the jurisprudence. So coming to Bill 68, I have to say that all the points that were made, I am totally in agreement with André. It's how it was brought. So I'm adding to that list of problems with how it was brought was that people are fed up. You know, this notion. Well, you don't legislate because people are fed up. There has to be a real problem. And it's one of the first tests that courts will look at when you seek to limit fundamental rights. They're going to look at, is there a real and urgent problem? So he's going to have a hard time, and I imagine the Ministry of Justice is going to have a very difficult time when they go to court if this ever gets adopted. It's going to be challenging for them to get this adopted because the three parties are against the bill in its present form. Not all parts of it. It's important that we come back to that. So urgent, real need. Well, listen, I was a Minister of Justice. I once had a problem with my computer. I tell this story often. And there was a fonctionnaire who came wearing a headscarf, totally competent, gracious, fantastic. I was very, very delighted with the service I got. And once at the Ministry of Immigration, I had a problem with my computer. Same experience, not the same person wearing a headscarf, very competent, gracious, and I was very satisfied with their services. There were not many people who I haven't seen any people with turbans in the public civil service here in Quebec. Or I haven't seen kibas, and I haven't seen judges with any of these religious signs, and we're all talking about that as well these days. So the urgent, real need, so there's no studies, there's no data, there's just this notion of people are fed up. And you don't legislate because people are fed up. You have to look for the real issue. So the ill at ease, and I was going to say that I'm not sure that we have marriage would be legalized for homosexuals, or women would have the right to vote if it was based on, people's discomfort with certain things. And that's why we have charters of rights, to protect minorities. So getting to I think the heart of the matter is the restriction, the ban on, Bill 60 has this ban on all religious clothing and symbols. And, there was how it was brought out, and I won't, as I say, repeat what André said, but everything that André said is right on the money in terms of the frustration that people had with how this debate was brought forward. And the whole notion of secularism, it's important because what we did in Bill 94 is confirm the neutrality of the state. And secularism and neutrality, secularism and la laïcité française comes very much from the Catholic religion and experience with the Catholic religion, and has very much to do with a French historical political context. You cannot do a cut and paste. Let's take laïcité française and let's just put it here, Quebec, and it's going to protect us and protect our identity. We have open secularism, and it was confirmed in Bouchard-Taylor. There was a number of important reports over the years. Open secularism has always been interpreted such as the state is neutral, the church and state are separate, and the churches and state are separate. People have their freedoms, and religious freedom is one of them, and the freedom to express it, and they can express it through what they wear. What they wear is considered part of their identity. So you can't leave your identity at home. You can't say, look, okay, I'll put this in the drawer, that's my identity, and I'm going to go to work. It just doesn't work that way. So when those messages, even when Monsieur Drainville was asked, well, what are you going to do with the women who work in the civil service? Because really, those are the people we're talking about. Well, we will discuss, and we will hope to convince them, and we will negotiate. He didn't want to say the word fire, but at the end of the day, we talk about disciplinary measures, which means ultimately the person says, no, I can't leave my identity anywhere else. It's with me, it's part of me. That the consequence would be firing. So the whole notion of employment, whereas we've all been talking about making a Quebec public service more reflective of the society around us, not less, it just goes completely against what everybody's been talking about and what governments have been really fighting for and promoting over the last years. When we came into government in 2003, it was about 2% diversity in the civil service. When we left, we were up to 7%. And it's through programs of promoting diversity within the civil service, because you need a civil service that reflects the society around you. So this bill essentially, and the issue of proselytizing. So the other basic rule about neutrality is what you ask from your civil servants is that they be competent, professional, and that they don't do any what's called proselytizing. They're not trying to, send you religious messages. I mean, I smile because, I've worked in government for 5 years, and you never come across that. You never come across that. Everybody's very, very competent, and so it's just such a false issue. So I'm just going to give you. I'd like to quote for you, and I think it's just a beautiful quote. I'm a lawyer, and sometimes when you want to just feel good about the fact that you live in a democracy, I'm going to give you a quote, and it applies so much. It's the Oaks case. The Oaks is this famous case of the Supreme Court that established all the rules when you want a limited freedom. There's the urgent and real need, and there's the proportionality test. If any of you ever want to go into law, but it's good for everybody to know this. Proportionality. You want to limit a right? Are you doing greater good for the community, or are you doing greater harm? And so there's a balancing act that you have to do. And of course, the Human Rights Commission and all other the barreau, le jeune barreau du Québec, l'association du jeune barreau du Québec just came out with their opinion. So they tend to give you the legal arguments. But this is what Brian Dixon said in the Oaks case. It highlighted the key values of the charter, and he says basically it comes from the phrase "a free and democratic society" in the Canadian Charter of Rights. It should be used as the ultimate standard for interpretation of Section 1, which is the clause that limits freedoms. These include values such as respect for the dignity of the human person, commitment to social justice and equality, accommodation of a wide variety of beliefs, respect for cultural and group identity, and faith in social and political institutions which enhance the participation of individuals and groups in society. It's a beautiful quote, and it applies perfectly to what we're all living and why many of us are opposed, but I'm hoping actually that in this room there may be some who are for the charter so we can have a good discussion. That's where I think people are feeling it instinctively. It's this notion of dignity, this notion of inclusiveness, this notion of equality, this notion of justice. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about justice. So I had the opportunity to have the opinion of the Ministry of Justice on this file. And when governments, I can tell you that governments have their number one responsibility, when they have a bill that they want to present, and the Charter of Rights is involved, it's kind of like this alarm bell that goes off, and it basically says you have to make sure, and you have to advise the government, the Conseil des Ministres, that the charter is being impacted by the bill that you're bringing forward. And the decision makers have to make the decision, okay, we're going to use the notwithstanding clause to override the rights. So certainly we were never going to use a notwithstanding clause, because first of all, we wouldn't believe in infringing these rights. So what you have an obligation to be a responsible government to bring forward legislation that is not going to infringe on the Charter of Rights. And that's where we don't get any clear answers whenever the Minister of Justice, in fact, while I'm here right now, one of the reasons I'm replacing Marc Tanguay is that Marc Tanguay and Gilles Ouimet, who's the previous bâtonnier of the Quebec bar, are questioning the Minister of Justice on this issue right now. So we traded off. I came here to meet with the Bernard Drainville and Concordia, and they are questioning the Minister of Justice on why isn't he coming forward with his opinions about this charter. And you know, I feel sort of fortunate that I was there in this file just a few years ago. It's the same fonctionnaires that are there. What opinions did they go get to come forward? I think that's the question that people will be asking the minister. So you've heard all the so you know, I think I'd like to end. So there, I think there's some comfort. There's some comfort that can come with the fact that we live in a democracy. There's freedom of speech. We have universities. We have places like this where we can debate these issues in an enlightened way. We have a human rights. We have a Charter of Rights. We have a Human Rights Commission. We have courts. That at the end of the day, if the rule of law is not respected, the courts are there to remind us that the rule of law and can then declare a law null and void because they've contravened the Charter of Rights. Now, if the bill does get passed, there's a number of steps to go through. My worry, though, and I think Armand expressed this worry really well, and there's a big article in the Gazette this morning about hate being propagated not just on the metro and the street and the mosques in Saguenay, but on the internet. It's a very disturbing piece. It's a big piece. I'd encourage you to read it. So we're in a position where we can't necessarily wait, or we're worried about waiting for the rational process to see its way through with a calm debate in the National Assembly and court challenges, etc. It's the here and now that we're all worried about. So we're all saying to the government, we can't afford the scarring that's going to happen. We can't afford people talking even about leaving. We can't afford not attracting the best and brightest that we need to attract to help us build a better Quebec, a Quebec that we all love and Quebec that we're so attached to. So we're saying there are lots of points of consensus. Yes, the neutrality of the state, we can put that in the Charter of Rights. Yes, we can have what we call in French balises pour les accommodements raisonnables. You'll hear that word a lot. Some guidance in terms of what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, because there is a real debate there. We can also look, and we as a party have already talked about this, real concrete measures to answer the certain fears that have been expressed about radicalism. And it's not super prevalent in Quebec, but it's important to address it. We did have a serious case of honor killings a couple of years ago, and there's been a and I'd encourage you to read it. It's the avis du Conseil du Statut de la Femme. So there are concrete measures like that, but this bill, there are parts of it that we can agree with. We're telling them to remove the part that is causing so much disturbance and for people to be so upset and, frankly, inapplicable. Hospitals, top surgeons wearing a kippah, can you even imagine that anybody the hospital's going to require them to take off the kippah? I can't imagine a patient asking them to. They want that heart surgeon. They want that nurse wearing, that great nurse. You hear a lot of testimonials to this effect. So I think that we should all be working towards that, and as responsible opposition in the House, we are going to continue to give that message to the government. Unfortunately, the minister today said he was worried about violence. Well, there's an easy way to put an end to any fears that he has, and we don't know what evidence he had, is to find a consensus. And I think we need to all find a consensus. There's a nice happy medium in all of this. It does not involve barring people from working in the civil service because they're wearing a religious piece of clothing or something. That's it. So that concludes.
So we have about half an hour. Let's remember this is a panel discussion meant to engage information and dialogue with students, right? So, and GSA has sort of invited us all as witnesses. And in that light, I'd like to invite the GSA students to be the first to come to the microphone and take a couple of questions from graduate students or undergraduate students. And then we should have time. Hopefully the questions will engage both our panelists. And hopefully we will have time to open the floor to perhaps Concordia Media or any other Concordia students and anybody else that's taken the time to come and be with us today. Does that sound good? And please try and avoid long preambles and big commentaries and soapboxes, and formulate your question as clearly as you can as you come to the microphone. Thank you. We have a start here.
Hello?
Oh, identify yourself and your faculty.
My name is Jonathan Summers. I'm a graduate student in Educational Studies here at Concordia. Thank you for coming today. First of all, Ms. Weil took the opportunity to brag about the Liberal government's record, citing the Human Rights Commission and the Charter of Rights numerous times. However, this didn't seem to be a concern when her government passed Bill 70. It's convenient that she mentions it now, but that wasn't my main question. My main question is about the Charter.
Please avoid the soapbox.
She can address that in a minute. But,
no, she won't, because you're out of order. So address yourself to the panel and ask the question, please.
Sure.
Just a reminder, I've been in this file since 2010 as Minister of Justice. This particular file.
But you voted in favor of Bill 70.
Would you'd have to be more specific.
I'm ruling this on order.
Okay.
Sorry. Go on with your question.
All right. Well, I think it's unfortunate that Minister Drainville isn't here today, but I think we've already heard him enough. We've heard the PQ enough on this charter over and over and over again over the last few months. Number one, we know it's a distraction. It's a diversion from the real problems of Quebec, social and economic problems. Secondly, we know it's playing on the fears of voters in the regions of multiculturalism that we here in Montreal live with every day. We know it's not the government's place.
You off, man.
We know it's not the government's
That's
place
it.
to legislate values.
Shut his mic down, please.
Or
thank you.
Can I just say one thing? No, it's just about it was just, I will brag a little more. It was a liberal government that enacted the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms.
Next.
Hi.
Yeah, we got you.
It is. Let's get closer. Hello, my name is Amy. I'm a poli-sci student here at Concordia. I wanted to thank both the panelists as well as the moderator for coming out today. So, I don't know, I heard a lot of talk about inclusion and reasonable accommodation. And also like the success of waves of immigrants, different kinds of immigrants to Canada and to Quebec. And I'm wondering what both of you have to say, or what relationship you can talk about with the First Nations in Canada. Because I know that the Mohawk, the Algonquin, and the Cree all have a lot of perspectives to share about accommodating people onto their land. So I want to kind of hear like what thoughts you have as to both like including Indigenous people in the conversation and really looking to them for their knowledge and their perspectives.
That's a great parallel question, but briefly, can you respond to it?
Well, I'm not a specialist in this area, but certainly the debate around reasonable accommodations, their needs and are so beyond anything to do with accommodating, right? Because they were the First Nations here. And I think people are, my colleague Jeff Kelly, who, as you know, Jeff Kelly, who's been Minister des Affaires Autochtones for many years, so appreciated by the Native communities, has worked so hard. He's very close to the communities. But there's the problems are so far reaching in terms of wanting more autonomy. And there have been, agreements made and signed with Quebec, successive Quebec governments. Attendees is an important one. But the debate around reasonable accommodation wouldn't touch them because we're not talking about, either religious accommodation, they have rights, you know, fundamental rights to exist, and mostly in a context of nations, they would call themselves nations across Canada. So it's very difficult to do a parallel with their challenges.
Can I just follow up really quickly? Like, I'm more wondering, like, what advice you're seeking from Indigenous people, as opposed to, like, accommodating them into, like, Quebec society.
As I say, this debate does not, this Bill 60 doesn't touch that issue at all, because it can't. It's
No, but I think, like, fundamentally it does, because you're being accommodated as separate.
But this is, how can I put this? This whole area of law, because it really is an area of law, is in a work context. You know, let's just be very pragmatic and basic about what this body of law is and what the bill is proposing. They're talking about civil servants. In fact, not many Native communities even in the civil service, so there you have a problem in terms of inclusion. You have problems of inclusion, problems of respecting their way of life when you're talking about the Native communities that are so far and beyond what this bill, and this bill doesn't purport to touch any of that issue. I think I understand your message is that we have to be respectful towards them who are the First Nations. And I'm not equipped, and I don't think this is the place to talk about all of the issues that they have and how successive governments have to deal with those, both at the federal level and all provinces.
Well, it's an interesting question because it drives us to quite the same perspective of inclusion and respect. Fortunately, I was part of a delegation last summer to visit Lac Barrier's First Nation Algonquin. It was a shock for me to see how they live and to see, for just an example, okay, to show that, well, first I have to say they have to be recognized as a nation. That's the first step I think we have to do. And what shocked me when I went there is while they were excluded from their land, well, it's near Mont-Laurier, you know, in Parc-de-la-Randée, and they were excluded from their land to build hydro services. Well, they are not provided by hydro, and they have no electricity in their reserve. That's totally crazy to see that. So when we are talking about minority, I think that it's not only a matter of inclusion and respect, but they have to be recognized as a nation with the rights that they should have, as well as Quebec, well, is asking for the same from Canada. I think it's very astonishing that, for example, Parti Québécois is saying that it has to be recognized from Canada, and a minority should not be écrasé by the majorité. But this is what we see right now, what it's doing with the minority. So it's not the same parallel, but I think there's something we have to learn about that.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alex. I'm a graduate student in the Faculty of Engineering. First of all, I want to thank both panelists and the moderator for being here. My question is, I read a recent publication that Quebec was losing a lot of people to other provinces. And my question is, don't you think that this bill will make some other people, including recent immigrants, leave the province? And the second question is, don't you think the government should be focusing on a lot of other things, like freezing tuition fees, the economy, and integrating people to build the economy and make Quebec a more prosperous place, rather than something like divisive?
André d'abord.
Well, I don't know if there's a lot of people leaving Quebec or will leave Quebec. I hope not. But if it's the case, it just shows us that, well, in my view, even though the project of law 60 is not adopted, which I think it won't be, but the damage is already done. There's a deep problem with that, the damage done, and we'll have to work for years to repair that. And that is our challenge right now, more than only the question of the project 60 from Parti québécois. And we have to answer that. And if what you say is true, it shows that we have a problem. On economic issues, I already said it. I think that when we're talking about inclusion, it's not only a matter of, of thinking, it's a matter of economic also problems. So if we want to include people, they need a job, a good job. And as far as I can see, for the past 12 years at least, and more than that, we've lived with cutbacks in social services and employment, and so this is not a good way to include people. So I don't know if it's an answer for your question, but it's a concern we have to answer too.
Just very quickly, because I see there are a lot of questions. Very good question. It's on everybody's mind. It's everybody's worry, is that we're going to lose these people that we need to build Quebec. We don't have any recent figures on it. A lot of people are talking about it. I think there's a bit of a wait and see. If this bill is really going to happen. But as you know, as I said in my speech before, this is why it's imperative and urgent that we find a consensus and we find our way through this, because we can't risk losing this talent. There's always an outflow. But Quebec has been able to stabilize the outflow over the last 10 years. And yes, there are other much more pressing issues. This is not even a pressing issue. And we've had confirmation from the Human Rights Commission and from Bouchard-Taylor, there is no issue. But we have problems in our healthcare system, problems with healthcare for seniors, problems with schools that need rebuilding, university financing. I mean, the list is so long of problems. Violence against women. This is always a major concern. I say that because this is the week to mark this initiative and these efforts to combat violence against women. So there's many other issues that the government should be focusing on.
Hi, my name is Amani. I'm a PhD student in social and cultural analysis. And my question, I think there's two questions in it. First of all, I've been, during my research, right, in the semester, and I've been talking a lot. I can only speak to the Muslim young people that I've spoken to. And many of the Muslim women I've spoken to are often born and raised in Montreal and in Quebec, and they see themselves as Canadian and even Quebecers. So the question when you were talking, that was in my mind was, we're talking about integration, we're talking about immigrants, but a lot of young people who will be affected by this law if it passes in any form, they are from Quebec and they represent a Quebec identity in and of itself. It's just not what the majority necessarily shares. So my question is, how do we kind of create this inclusion with this debate? Not even if this actually passes as a law, but we're having this debate of who is a Quebecer, who has the right to be part of this society and to create the culture in their everyday life. So I would appreciate it.
Do you have a second part to the question? Or
well, the second part was actually a second question, because I think both of you, one of you, were mentioning, women's rights and radicalization as things that are often equated with what certain, minority religions are assumed to represent. But in reality, especially in my research, I've seen that across the board, these young women are empowered women. They're women who are studying at university level, who speak their mind, who chose their personal way of expressing themselves. So assuming that they're lacking empowerment, that they're lacking agency, is actually taking away their subjectivity. It's taking away their demand for themselves and their right to make their own choices. And I would appreciate any reflections.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, really excellent comments. Excellent comments. They're full-fledged Quebec. But you know, we've been having this debate for a long time, for many of us in Quebec. Who is le nous? Who is included in le nous? And Anglophones, for years and years, asked the question, are we part of the nous? And we've, of course, argued that yes, we are part of the nous, been here for hundreds of years. So that's probably going to be an ongoing issue because, and on the other hand, there's, and I think you see this in all societies, really, it's not just unique to Quebec at all. This notion of, you see it very much in Europe, of preserving sort of a common identity that people can relate to. And as societies get more and more diverse, do you see the mainstream society, maybe the majorities, often the voices of governments reflect it. I'm thinking very much of Europe right now. Germany, Belgium, France, even now with Cameron. With even in England, you're hearing the same kind of discourse, right, around identity. So, but we always thought we were free from that here in Quebec. We thought we were very North American in our celebration of pluralism. And generally, Quebec, successive governments, both PQ and Liberal, been very respectful about preserving. When I was Minister of Immigration, I really it wasn't any kind of overt challenge to, and I say immigration because it's what's fed the diversity over the years. But then all of a sudden now we've just got this deviation that's causing these shock waves. So you're right, and I think it's important that Gérard Bouchard, when he talks about these issues, talks about interculturalism and the importance of dialogue. And clearly, organizations on the ground, including universities, they've got a big mandate ahead of them. A big mandate to make sure that we continue to have dialogue. And especially, people talk about the regions a lot, but I found that when I went into the regions and announced a project around immigration to bring people to the regions, it was usually the business people, the chambers of commerce, elected officials at the municipal level, and everything was very positive about immigration. I didn't hear these sort of negative comments. So I think we also have to look at some of the key players in civil society and engage because they have responsibilities in their own communities. For instance, in the Saguenay, the elected officials there, how they deal with that. On your second point, I think it's something that for elected officials is very challenging issue. This one about, and I'm particularly sensitive to it because you can't stigmatize any community that somehow they're more radical than any other. And that's why I talked about violence against women, because if you look at the statistics and look at some of the programs we're seeing on television these days, this is just ordinary Quebecers. You know, this is all over Canada. That people are, most women suffer violence at the hands of a family member. In all of North America, we're not free from that. So people have to be very, very careful when they talk about it. But there is a phenomenon, we saw it with the Frappier case, and so the schools, if you read La Vie du Conseil du Statut de la Femme, it's really well brought forward, and it's done with a lot of attention to this concern that one would stigmatize any religion over another. And sometimes it could be Christian fundamentalists, we've seen that in other societies, to be aware and to make sure that especially schools and the health system are attentive to it.
It seems to me that the two questions are very pertinent. And I think André may have a shorter response, but I wanted to intervene to say there hasn't been a party that's proposed a charter that would include all the religious symbols in public. And maybe that's a good strategy. That way everyone gets their equal shot. Go ahead, André.
Well, I'll be brief because I see there's a lot of questions, but I'm sorry if I don't answer everything, but just a few figures. And I appreciate your comment, your right to remind us. And just say that the unemployment rate actually with, for example, the Muslim community, it's 4 times the rate of the usual rate of, so it's 28%, so it's quite a lot. And also, somebody who's looking for an employment right now in Quebec, which French Quebecois name, has 60% more chances to get the job to an interview than that's non-American, African, or somebody with another name, you know. So there is systemic discrimination right now in employment. There is a problem, and that's why we think that we don't need something else to make more problem with that.
Thank you, André. I'll limit the responses to one of the two of the panelists to try and get in a couple more questions.
Okay, you talk about there's some integration problems for the government. I'm a graduate student in engineering, so I think that 95% of the classes in engineering is even not from the continent. And then I see that the Quebec government, they give up bursaries and all that, and even the French classes are and the same like Quebecois tuition fee. But even I don't see that people there. Even I'm immigrant too, and I see that the other immigrants are resisting to integrate. So I think the government is doing a lot of good things. If you go to another countries, Canada is really friendly and Quebec is really more friendly. So what's happening with the other side, with the immigrant side?
I'm not sure if I understand well. Could you just...
Tu veux que je résume?
Oui.
Dans plusieurs pays, il y a l'obligation pour les migrants d'intégrer. Et puis, il observe qu'il y a du monde, des immigrants qui soit ont du mal ou refusent l'intégration. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a du côté des immigrants? Ils pensent que le gouvernement du Québec fait des bonnes choses pour encourager des gens pour intégrer ici.
Well, I cannot answer, you know, give the answer that the government should have given to you. But I hope they're doing good things, I hope so. But what we see right now, as I said, I think there should be more class of integration in, you know, for the workforce. With the diploma, as I said also before, the recognition of the diploma you get in your country, and so, but I can't answer for them. So, if you could give some example, it would help.
Did you have an example?
Okay. For example, you mentioned about the rates of the employment in the Muslim communities against the Quebecois. Okay, I'm immigrant too, so I know that I'm against the culture, and the culture will not adapt to me. I need to adapt to the culture. So what I'm seeing here, I'm gonna say, we, us, the immigrants, we are resistant to adapt to the Quebec culture. That's what I see. For example, immigration Quebec. When I arrived here, I went to there and say, hey, I want to live here, what I can do. They told me your story. They told my story, where I work, get a master's degree, and you know, study French in the university because it's more easy. It's the easy way to enter to the country. But I see the other people is like just complaining. I see that half of the guilt of the fault that the people really doesn't want to adapt to Quebec. And this guy mentioned, people is going outside of the province. They say, you know, if I stay here, I need to learn French, so I prefer to go to Alberta or to US. So it's like, so why are you complaining about it?
I think we got the example from you personally, but when you wander off into a generalization about your observation of other groups, it's very difficult to respond. So we'll take your comment, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I would like.
Kathleen would like to respond. I'd like to get a couple more questions in first. Please.
Bonjour, permettez-moi de faire mon intervention en français parce que je m'exprime mieux en français qu'en anglais, malheureusement. Oui, malheureusement, dernièrement. Donc, mon intervention, c'est... le débat n'est pas nouveau pour moi. Je l'ai déjà vécu vécu avec ma soeur qui prépare son master en IT, au cas où Madame Weil a un problème avec son ordinateur, qui prépare son master en IT en France et qui a de la difficulté à trouver un stage. Et que l'année dernière, elle a dû faire son stage au Maroc, son pays d'origine, et que cette année aussi, elle trouve une grande difficulté à trouver un stage, et que la semaine dernière, elle a eu une réponse directe de Madame, votre voix dérange. Donc c'est pourquoi on ne peut pas vous prendre. Et enfin, je veux dire que les étudiants étrangers sont des ambassadeurs dans les deux sens, c'est-à-dire dans leur pays, et aussi quand ils reviennent dans leur pays. Et malheureusement, je peux vous laisser imaginer quelle impression et quel souvenir je vais garder de mon passage ici. Merci.
Vous voulez savoir quelle belle...
Non, c'est juste un témoignage en fait que je voulais partager avec M. Drainville, qui malheureusement n'est pas là, et aussi pour partager avec l'audience. Et je suis désolée de l'avoir fait en français. Et merci.
Merci. Question, please.
Hi.
Question, please.
Hello, hi. My name is Roshan, and I'm a graduate student from Toronto. Actually, I'm here doing field work.
Welcome.
And I have a question for Kathleen Weil. And I agree with you in terms of the arguments that you made about the Bouchard-Taylor Commission, in terms of the fact that much of the report actually found that there was no actual accommodation problems. A lot of it was a media construction actually. But I think there were quite a few critiques of one of the propositions within the report, which actually does claim that one should prevent authority figures, so judges, police officers, so those in positions of authority, from wearing religious symbols or religious clothing. But you also said that you actually don't find that many people, judges who wear kippas or whatever. So I wanted to know why your government is actually still insisting on, abiding by this particular proposal of the Bouchard-Taylor Commission. And also, I agree with the need to actually limit the scope of this debate and actually trying to get some kind of resolution in terms of the law, but at what cost, right? What are the concessions that are willing, what the different parties, and your party in particular, are willing to make? Because I see, it's rapidly kind of adding up, right? So there's judges and police officers. There's women in niqab now. That's sort of a consensus among all the parties. Who's next? Is it teachers? Is it daycare workers? Who's next to kind of be thrown under the bus, basically, in order to make these concessions and have a common, I don't know what the word is, a consensus actually for this law.
A very good question. I'm not a member of the government, and in fact, the government is proposing to go beyond Bouchard-Taylor. We did not recommend the implementation, when I was Minister of Justice, of that recommendation, the one to limit, to ban, if you will, religious signs amongst judges, Crown prosecutors, prison guards, and police forces. Because I had a legal opinion that said it would be a very difficult challenge constitutionally. And I was asked the question at the time by Paul Arcan. I said, well, I'm willing to look at the question rationally, but let me get some advice on it. I don't have to go very far. I didn't have to go very far. We have some of the best constitutional lawyers working right there at the Ministry of Justice. And so they highlighted the difficulties, and you just have to read the Oakes case and apply to each. And anybody who's interested in the law can see the challenges that it represents. The other parties sort of put it on the table as this is a compromise. This is a happy medium. It's a reasonable medium. But nobody seemed to look at the law. Nobody seemed to look at the law. So So we didn't go in that direction, and we didn't bring a charter of laïcité because I think that's a huge societal debate, and you can see how much confusion. I saw it when I was in hearings, people asking for this French form of secularism. It's really difficult. And Françoise David actually came. I really appreciated when she came to the hearings because she's a voice of moderation and voice of reasonableness, but the stuff we were hearing in commission, it's not always all that reasonable and rational. So our limit would be the charter rights. It would be that, you can never get past this, and you have to remind people, it's always on a case-by-case basis. That's how the respecting the charter works. That's how the Charter of Rights, that's how it works. So you can never duplicate it exactly. The legislator can give some orientation, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the one deciding to grant or not grant to an individual asking on the basis of some discriminatory effect whether the employer will accommodate. So you can't have a blanket restriction. And that's the problem with the message that's been given by Bill 60, is that you can do that. But they're doing it in the name of secularism. So there's a lot of confusion in this bill on all these notions, but I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We have very little time left. I can take 2 more questions, and so instead of the panel responding, I'll take 3, and if we have time, 4. But that means please make your questions to the point and brief.
First off, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Michael Forian. I just wanted to ask you about how Bill 60, the Charter of Values, has changed, not so much about, in the media, but more about political parties. How has it changed political parties in that respect? I bring it up because I come from Lapinière, Brossard. So Fatima Dupin is my deputy, my member of the National Assembly there. So obviously hearing about, her reservations about Mr. Couillard and the party plan in terms of what the Charter of Values is going to be. I just want to know how it has changed for Madame Maire. I want to know how has it changed the Solidaire du Québec from the core inside the caucus, what we see every day. If you could just respond to that,
Sure.
and also if you can also respond just to the fact that we saw with Mr. Couillard, he said he wouldn't let the charter pass over his dead body. Does that still stand? Where do you stand today?
Well, hopefully we won't have to go that far.
I hope not.
Let's
Thank you
hold on
again.
the response. Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Mariam. I'm from Université de Montréal. I just want to know what's going to be done about the intolerance and the hate that's currently being manifested, because this charter opened up a can of worms, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone that's directly affected by this charter that until it's been proposed, I've never felt so ostracized or so targeted. So what happens now? How am I sure that even if this law doesn't pass, the day that I need to go and apply for a job or go do my stages in Saguenay and anywhere else in Quebec, that I'm not going to be refused on the basis of what I'm wearing?
Thank you very much. Anybody that's got a no on this, is going to speak first. Go ahead. 2 more sets of questions. Go ahead.
Well, I have 2 questions, and
Ça doit être vite.
je vais dire en français, ça va être vite.
D'accord, vas-y, ça va aller.
Première question, je vais juste répondre à madame pour dire que le Québec, c'est un des États les moins racistes au monde. Qu'au Japon, quand t'es un Coréen et tu vas au Japon, t'es même pas un citoyen japonais, t'es considéré comme un citoyen coréen.
Ça peut être pire ailleurs.
Ça peut être fait,
J'ai compris.
moi je vois
C'est
qu'on
quoi
très
votre
bien ici.
question? C'est quoi votre
Deuxième
question?
question, je voulais savoir, moi quand je vais travailler dans le secteur public ou quoi que ce soit, c'est quoi mes droits à moi que la région ne fait pas les concessions? Ce que je veux dire, c'est moi quand je vais travailler, j'ai pas le droit de porter ma casquette, j'ai pas le droit de tatou, j'ai pas le droit d'avoir les cheveux rouges. Alors je comprends pourquoi quelqu'un, pour des motifs religieux, aurait le droit de porter un foulard ou quoi que ce soit.
On va essayer de répondre. Patiente un peu. Next question.
Hi, I just wanted to make an announcement for those people that are interested in, once again, this very important topic. We're continuing tonight with a roundtable discussion at the Hall building from 7:15 to 9:30. There's going to be a roundtable discussion headed by human rights lawyers and activists, LGBT people, racialized communities, and other equality-seeking groups. It's being sponsored by the Simone de Beauvoir Institute, CRAR, Institute for Research, Action, and Race Relations, and the CSU. So once again, if you're interested in this topic, there's going to be more discussions on it tonight, 7:15 to 9:30 at the Hall building at room 435. We have posters outside if you want more information. Thank you.
J'ai comme 2 minutes pour donner à André, 2 minutes pour donner à Kathleen.
I just want to follow up on your question, just before mine. I'm going to add a very
Non, 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 non. Sorry, je dois donner la parole à côté. Et moi, on va essayer, si on peut le rejoindre, on va voir. C'est un débat qui peut me demander après aussi.
No, I wanted to add on to her question. It's the same.
Let me, okay. But first, I'd like to hear 2 minutes from André. Kathleen, we're going to have to stop.
Well, on the 3 questions, yeah, okay. So, but I think the first one was addressed to Kathleen more, but I just want to say that, as I said at first, it's a debate we had when we took our position in 2009, but of course, it's still a debate inside the Québec Solidaire. Majority of our members voted our position at that time, but there are still some that not necessarily agree on everything on that, and it's still something inside that they want to discuss, and that's normal. That's okay, and it came not only because of the legislation, but it was before. So I would be brief on that. On how to stop intolerance and hate and the way it's been done, I really have no fast solution about that. I think that what we're doing today is a good way to do it. I think the way to discuss together, make people get together to know each other. I think that's the first step, because most part of time when there's intolerance, it's because people don't know. They don't know the other person. They just know what they live here, what they have used to know all their life. And when we connect people together, that's a very good and the first step to do. And we should make more opportunity like this to discuss more widely with people. I think would be a part of the solution, a first step. And about our rights at work, I would just say briefly that, well, they are collective agreement, most part of time, not always, but when it's unionized. But it's not the same thing if we consider, I've no necessarily example, and to wear something specific, or I would say political button or union button or something like this, or anything else which is regulated by the employer. And then manner of I would say in this time it's not a political issue, it's a cultural and religious issue, which is not the same. And what I find very strange in that point on the legislation in the Bill 60, it's comfortable for the Christian people, and so they're not opposed. You're allowed, you know, the draft is you're allowed to wear a small button with a cross, or you're allowed to, which always been the case for people, for Christian people. There we can see not much people wearing, you know, a big demonstration. So it's just making the people comfortable while addressing a specific question to, as I said, to Muslim women. And it's a judgment that we're making in that case, and it's intolerance. I don't know in English, and so that I think has no room, no place in our here in our society. It's totally different.
I'll try to go quickly. So the first question about immigrants having an obligation to integrate. I would tell you my experience as Minister of Immigration, but not also somebody who grew up in a milieu. My father was from the States, he was immigrant. Is that immigrant? I have to answer that question. Or I think in order. They are the first to understand that they have to integrate. It's my experience with immigration my whole life. An immigrant, when he picks up or she picks up and leaves their country, so with a whole lot of courage that they do it. But I do, the point is well taken. Whoever made the point is well taken, and obviously this approach to integrate is important, and people do have to make an effort to learn French. That's a requirement. There's lots of courses offered in French, and people do need to take that on. On the issue of, peut-être la dernière question sur le code vestimentaire, c'est-à-dire des obligations, il faut savoir qu'il y a des tests juridiques, et ce test-là de port de signes religieux, c'est considéré comme l'expression d'une liberté religieuse. Donc, le code vestimentaire, c'est-à-dire la casquette, c'est pas un droit fondamental.